Okay, so this slideshow is going to talk about whether there is a correlation between the COGAT test, stands for Cognitive Abilities Assessment, and the STAR test, which would be Reading, Math, and Language Arts. Specifically, we are going to be focusing on the Math STAR test and recent COGAT tests for first graders. So in the problem and hypothesis section, we're really focusing on, I chose these two data points because recently the district that I worked for moved from using STAR to help identify gifted students to the use of the Cognitive Abilities Test. And so moving from the STAR to the COGAT, we're noticing that a lot of the kids that are now receiving services are very different from the students that received them before, talking about behavior grades, several other things as well, but those are really the two biggest. So in thinking about that, I was very curious if there would be a correlation between those data points when I looked at one specific class that I have both COGAT data and STAR data for. So my overarching question would be, is there a correlation between STAR data and COGAT data? The subjects that I used for this study would be first grade students. I had 6 boys and 5 girls that I had data points in both the Cognitive Abilities Test and STAR Math. For very specific to just one teacher that I work with in West Fargo, the data was collected in May of 2018 for both tests, and I used the COGAT screener, which would be the first 3 sections of the COGAT full test, which there are a lot more sections than 3, but there would be 1 section for verbal, 1 for nonverbal, and 1 for quantitative. And then I also used the STAR Math test from these first graders. So here it just shows how I set up the Pearson correlation. The first row would be student, like the student ID that I used to recognize which student I was talking about. Their STAR score would be the second column, and then their COGAT score would be the column farthest over. So the interval data was chosen from this one class for students that scored only in the average to the above average range on the COGAT screener. And the reason that I did just those students is because those are the students that I could potentially work with as their gifted educators. So those are the only students that I chose to look at in just this one class. STAR data is representative with a max score of 99, and a lot of you are similar, like you use the STAR scores in your school. It's very common to just use it to see where students are at, or for AR, or whatever you guys are using them for. So specifically, these students that I chose with the COGAT, that's what I was wondering. If they had a high COGAT score, would they also score fairly well on STAR? And you see a lot of 90s over there, so that's where I was kind of curious. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with the COGAT, a lot of the time the score of 90 to 110, about 90 to about 110, is students in the average range, and then above that would be above average. Now, this is different than IQ tests, but very similar on the scale of numbers, as gifted would be right around the 130 range on a general IQ score. So that just kind of allows you to see a little bit more about what that COGAT score might mean if you're not familiar with it. So down at the bottom, once this was ran through SPSS, then you could see whether this was significant data or not. And the one that I like to look at mostly is the number of students, because there was so few data points that were used on this. So the N there is the number of students, and that was 11. Like I said earlier, 6 boys and 5 girls. The R score, so the Pearson correlation on this is a 0.153, which means it's very weak to no relationship at all between those two test scores. The closer that number would be to 1 would mean that the more significant that it is. And so you can definitely see that this one is a very weak relationship. Looking at the two-tailed number there, that's wondering if this would be significant data, and it's a 0.654, which is definitely not exciting. We want to be closer down to 0.05 in order for it to be considered definitely more significant. So that high number tells us that this is not significant at all. In conclusion then, since we're looking at all this data, we have it saying that it's not significant, and that could be due to a couple things. Down at the bottom I wrote that if I did this again, I would probably change, I would have more data points to look at, so there's more, just more information. And then I also would probably change it and do the entire first grade class and not just the students that I would be looking for, so we have more data points to go off of and more number of students as well to see if that would give me similar information or not. So my conclusion would be that I cannot say with certainty whether there is correlation between these two data points because the results were not significant. And then there is my reference to the book. Thanks.